Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad, bringing you Capitalism Hits Home, a show about the interpenetration and mutual shaping of the economy, personal life, and politics, how they all combine to shape one another, and brought to you by Democracy at Work, a nonprofit organization devoted to promoting the idea that co-ops should be the way we organize our economy, so no people accumulate power over other people that is not accountable. It's a powerful idea to reshape economies without hierarchy. And I do hope you listen to this podcast and the others on Democracy at Work. Today, I want to talk about a revolution that's happening all over the world and is barely mentioned. And that's the revolution in the nuclear family. 89% of nations now have dwindling marriage rates. By 2100, 97% of the globe will not reproduce itself because people aren't having children either. And the basic emotional organization in our country has been the nuclear family. And it's now being reversed and changed in a revolutionary way that is not really well recognized. Now, the nuclear family, far from being eternal or natural, in quotes, present throughout history, that's just not true. It hasn't been. But the nuclear family of the father, the mother, and the children, and sometimes extended family of the grandparents and so on, has only been around since about the time of the French Revolution. What came before was the feudal family, because people lived in the economic organization called feudalism, where big lords of the manor, landowners, parceled out parcels of land to serfs who farmed that land and gave a lot of it over to the lord for his wealth and kept only that portion that would allow them to survive and have children, reproduce themselves. The Middle Ages are characterized by that, and the ideological rationalization for that was the Catholic Church in Europe, which said that this was God's will and got people to believe it. That family form had the feudal lord at the top, then the father of his little family underneath that, in command of the farm, the little land he was allotted. He didn't own it, but he was allotted it. He gave some other power to his oldest son. And the father and the oldest son decided whether you could marry, the other siblings could marry, when they could marry, and what they did. All rationalized by the Catholic Church. Well, that began to break down when the lords of the manor found it more profitable to raise large herds of sheep and knock out these little farms, which couldn't be subdivided anymore. And so they kicked the serfs off the land. It was their land, not the serfs. And the serfs migrated into places that became towns and cities, trying to make a living, and totally dislocating the whole syndrome of the feudal family, because the feudal father wasn't there. The local Catholic Church wasn't there to enforce their rules. And serfs were in the cities. Feudalism began to fold as people were impoverished, were thrown out, and were beginning to question the Catholic Church, which was itself a huge feudal landowner with lots of serfs, and the other institutions that it held them in when they were in feudal families. And they were angry, and they formed their own troops, and they started the French Revolution in France. It was a revolution against feudalism. Well, some of the revolutionaries that people are rarely talked about were children. Young people joined the revolution. They staffed some of the barricades. They collected unspent shells for the troops. They were important participants. The character Gavroche in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables was a street urchin, because people, when they got to the towns and they weren't hemmed in by the morality of the Catholic Church and their feudal fathers, they screwed around a lot. They abandoned their kids. They abandoned pregnant women, and chaos reigned. And kids formed gangs in order to live, often predatory gangs. And these gangs went often to the side of the revolution, certainly not to the other side. So that after the French Revolution was won against feudalism and the Catholic Church, there was a huge demand for state support for children. This is beautifully documented by Jacques Donzelot in a book called Policing the Family. And the rich people that were there, and those were the remnants of the church, wealthy, the remnants of the landed aristocracy, and the new bourgeoisie, the businesses that were starting in the towns. They got together, alarmed, because they thought, oh no, these people are demanding state support for the family. Who has the money to be taxed for state support? We do, and we're the only ones. We've got to stop this. And they made a deliberate decision. That decision was that we will create a new kind of feudal family, where the father is the feudal lord of his family. The mother obeys that lord and gets protection in pregnancy and child rearing. The children are chattel that serve the mother and primarily the father. And we will enforce that family form by giving only people in that financial configuration and emotional configuration, only in that family form, they will be given jobs, which they needed to survive in the chaos following the demise of feudalism and the beginning of what would be capitalism at the time. And thus, they enforced the creation of the nuclear family. That's important to understand, because the nuclear family is usually presented to us as, quote, natural, which means of nature and unchangeable, because it is so natural and biological, which it isn't. In the ancient caves, they never find a person alone or just a few people. They find larger groups because people needed one another to survive and live together, not in isolated nuclear families, but in groups. Now, what happened to change that? What happened to change that family, which is a smaller feudal family with the father in charge, the mother and children dependent, the children as chattel, and the wife as a full-time domestic and sexual servant of the father, as well as a child care person. What changed it is it started changing in the 1970s all over the world as men were deserted from their well-paying jobs. In the United States, which I know best, factories moved to places that pay less. Computers and quick jet travel and things like faxes allowed capitalists to communicate with their factories and have control while allocating managers and others to the labor of producing what they needed to produce. If you look at it now, Chinese workers, even now, they're the best paid of the workers to whom we outsourced our manufacture. They get $5.51 an hour, whereas Pakistanis get $1.65 an hour. And Indians, on average, these are average hourly salaries, get $2.43 an hour. Plus, the capitalists could be freed. They don't have the ecological laws and considerations. Even the weak ones we have, they don't. Or they have ones that are even weaker. And they also don't have the same protections, pensions, sick leave, all those other things that workers fought and died for in the United States. So capitalists could earn a wild amount of money, bring that money back to the United States, and buy our for sale political system. Well, the marriages that we have were constructed on the basis of, in the white community, which used to be the majority, far and away the majority communities in the United States. Black and other minority men never made the family wages white men made, but they were a greater minority until the mid-70s. So marriage, which was constructed on the model of the male as feudal lord, can't be maintained. Some try. The Southern Baptist Convention on men and women just ruled that women couldn't be pastors because they could never be the heads of men, that women must be subordinate to men. And this is in 2024. They decided that. So there are these people like Trumpists who want to bring back the old order, supposedly under the idea of making America great again. Well, now that men don't make the salaries they did that could support a family, all women, white women, have to join their black sisters and their minority sisters in the labor force because people can't get along on a male salary alone. And women didn't any longer want to come home to what Arlie Hochschild so well called the second shift of all the domestic labor, taking care of the children, sexual services, emotional services, helping their men express themselves, because it's unmanly to have feelings, and also sexual services and connection services, connecting their children with play dates, connecting them with their school, connecting the man and his children with their families. That was too great a load. Emotional connection, sexual connection, social connection, child care, domestic work of all kinds. It was too much. And women began deserting marriage. That has happened all over the world as agricultural laborers are paid less. And women have had to go to work. And because of that, there has been a revolutionary change in the United States. The majority of women are now single. The majority of marriages end in separation or divorce. Legal separation or divorce only cancels 43% of first marriages, 65% of second marriages, and 73% of third marriages. Whereas increasingly, as Americans don't have the money, and as divorce costs on average $7,000 for a divorce, the majority of Americans are now just splitting. Those who don't have money to fight over or don't have children to fight over just split and make agreements with one another. And so that all sorts of living arrangements have developed. There's co-abode, as well as a second place where single women can bring up their children together. There's co-housing, where people with and without children, but who would like to spend some time with children, live together in their own apartments in a big building, where they can spend time together and where the collective spaces are greater. More and more apartments in cities like San Francisco cater to single people, where they have huge collective spaces with, collective kitchens and entertainment centers and very small apartments of their own, so that institutions are developing that recognize this. Significantly, I think, in the New York Times marriage pages, in the styles section of the New York Times, they record marriages between two women who are not sexual partners, but agree that they want to share their lives together and share whatever incomes they have and leave to one another whatever property and money they've accumulated. And there's, now that gay marriage is allowed, women can get married to each other, whether or not they're sexual. I haven't seen any two men in the pages of the New York Times who are doing this, but women are doing this to the point where it's now allowable to be announced in the New York Times. Because relationships, marriage, and children have changed. And this is true all over the world, which is quite impressive. There's a book called Opting Out: Women of the World Mess with Marriage. Scholarly book by ethnographers and anthropologists. That whole institution is changing. These basic institutions have had a revolutionary change. And it isn't remarked upon as the revolution that it is. But it should be. And it should be not only remarked, but we should be creating co-living organizations and supports so that people and their children can have the support of these connections without having to be in nuclear families, which they are increasingly refusing. And so that has been a revolution we need to comment on, a revolution we need to be interested in, a revolution we need to be conscious of, rather than have this fantasy that marriage means happily ever after, which is totally contradicted by the world around us. And we need to celebrate and support with rents, with homes, with finances, with our whole society, the revolutionary changes that have happened under the radar of mass media. This is the end for today of Capitalism Hits Home, brought to you by Democracy at Work. Thank you. Goodbye for now.